Today's podcast sponsor is Huber Engineered Woods, and I want to talk to you about zip sheathing and why we use zip sheathing. I know you've heard me talk about it on the podcast before, but I thought let's just lay it out in the simplest of forms. Number one, when I install it properly, I tape the seams, I liquid flash the seams, I manage for water with my windows. I use their products. I don't have to worry about water. There are times when we install drywall inside of a house and we don't have cladding on the outside because I know zip system is going to be waterproof. So that's number one. Number two, I can manage for air. So using zip system sheathing on the walls, my last 5 houses we built were all below passive house levels of air leakage. They were all below that 0.6 ACH50. And we're not putting that much effort into air sealing. We're just making sure that we tape well, which we manage for water, we manage for air. And the last 5 houses that I've built all had zip R, because that continuous insulation that comes adhered to the back of my zip sheathing that I'm already putting up and installing, now I have continuous R value that I get the whole R6 or the R9 or R12, whatever it is. I don't see building any other way. It works for us. It can work for you. Make sure you go to huberwood.com and check them out. And Huber, thanks for sponsoring the podcast. Welcome to the UnBuild It Podcast, both in podcast format and YouTube format. So if you can see us, chances are you're on YouTube or standing outside. And if you can hear us, then that means that you're more tech savvy than Peter, because Peter doesn't know how to listen to the podcast.
Oh, boy.
We're starting off early today. So let's talk about with the picking at Peter. Sorry.
But you didn't introduce us.
Sorry. I'm Jake Bruton. I'm a builder in Columbia, Missouri. I'm joined by Peter Yost.
Clueless.
And Steve Basic.
Bumblebee, bumblebee, bumblebee. Just mic testing.
Oh, okay. I was wondering if that was ever going to get old. That's what I was.
No, it's never going to get old.
If I say that, it ensures it comes back in the next
bumblebee
episode.
rant.
What's the buzz, buddy?
I'm not.
Bumblebee buzz.
What's the
Goodness. You would have absolutely killed on 1950s television.
That stung me. Peter. That
stung me. Okay.
Oh,
I
nice.
can tell you didn't hear him say that the first 2 times.
That was a sweet joke.
Oh, man. Okay, so topic today is crawl spaces and crawl space details. And the reason for this is because you always say, well, it's just a short basement. It's not if it's connected to the outside. It's not if there's soil gases getting into it.
I wouldn't say it's not. I'm saying I hate labels, right? So basement, crawl space, all of this. Imagine a world where we just called it the lower level, right? And everything below the floor was a lower level. So we either had slab on grade houses or we had a house with a lower level, right? So if we take the label,
foundation level.
So you got to change it, right? So you have to apply labels. That's your victim.
How is lower level?
No, you're a victim of our culture.
Label.
You're a victim of our culture. You try and bash the military. You have to apply labels. All of these things. Let's just flow with this for a second, right? Let's pretend that we only have slab on grades and we have lower levels. I sound like, who's the guy from Seinfeld there, right? It's all about levels. Did you see that one? Obviously,
Fraser? No.
Fraser.
Shut up, all right?
I have no idea.
That's obvious. That is obvious. That's probably the most obvious thing you said.
Peter just had a flashback to the last time that his family owned a television. Frasier and Seinfeld.
I can see him smacking the side of it, adjusting the aluminum foil. Aluminum foil.
Oh, my word.
But who's the guy on Seinfeld? The guy that was always falling all over the place? Kramer. Yeah, so it's all about levels. But anyways, let's get back to it. So imagine, and I'm being 100% serious here, even though we're saying it with a smile, but if we said slab on grade and just the lower level, then now we have an understanding that there is nothing basement, crawl space, they're the same thing. It's just a lower level. That lower level has some kind of depth to it, some whether it's ventilated or unventilated, it's just a vented lower level or an unvented lower level, right? So
A lot of labels in this description, by the way.
well, there is a bunch of labels, but those are attributes to the general label of lower level. So I'm trying to paint.
Continue.
I'm trying to paint a picture here. But so if we said lower level, and then what are these details? I mean, I guess we're trying to say is that building science doesn't understand, right? Mother Nature's not sitting there saying, "Oh, it's a crawl space. It's only 3 feet deep, so we
should treat it differently."
We should treat it different. No, the laws of physics doesn't care. Now, it does care in some levels because the smaller area is going to have less air volume to, say, dissipate moisture or hold moisture content. So you might have potentially different microclimates and stuff in smaller crawl spaces. Because I've been in houses where literally the dirt floor bottom of joist is measured in inches, and you can't even crawl in there. But some of them are successful. So I don't know. What do you think about lower levels and basements, crawl spaces, just this idea in general? You've been way too silent for me.
I think you've been digging a pretty deep hole with this whole thing to begin with. But it's appropriate given that we're talking about lower levels.
That's why he's been quiet, because he's been sitting on that
sitting on his
joke.
Peter jokes.
Well, I think it's interesting.
For those that don't know, Peter jokes are like exponentially bad dad jokes.
Well, I thought the title was Crawl Space Details. So are we having a philosophical discussion about what should the lower level be or not be? Or are we saying, hey, one of the solutions is a crawl space. Let's talk about the details.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
He introduced it from a philosophical standpoint.
Well, I think we need to understand what we're doing before I can detail something, right? I need to understand what's my end game.
There you go.
I like the way that you always step back as a designer and say, hey, not what are the details? Why are we going to choose this approach to begin with? So I like that. What are the...
Okay, hey, so we're done. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode.
I like it when we just stare at Peter and he stops talking.
We made Peter happy, so that's part of our goal here at the UnBuild It Podcast.
Okay, so the philosophical argument of whether it's a basement or whether it's a crawl space, the details don't really change. The only thing that I would say is like where we put the envelope at that point. So if we're building, let's break the crawl spaces into two categories, vented and non-vented, which means not part of the envelope of the house and part of the envelope of the house. So if it's not part of the envelope of the house, our most important crawl space detail is separation, right? Separating the building envelope from that outside space. And in my mind, I think of it as if it's a vented crawl space, it's a house on piers. We wouldn't allow the floor to just be uninsulated to the air if the house were sitting on piers or on columns, stilts, whatever. It's just that we've filled in between those stilts. So we need that air in there to circulate and not be nasty because it's gonna affect the house a little bit. It could cause rot if nothing else. It needs to be thermally broken from that space, the house does, and it needs to be air sealed from that space. So that means our envelope, our red line test, as Steve always draws, comes down the wall and has to go across the bottom of the floor joist.
And I think that the history of crawl spaces in the country is not from the approach of shortening basements. It's from enclosing piers.
Yep.
And I think that was mainly sort of in the...
Elevating a slab.
Ooh, elevating a slab.
Right? Because a lot of houses I'm venturing, like originally in Louisiana or Houston and stuff, were probably built like timbers on the ground, right? So you come over, you lay a bunch of timbers on the ground, and then you realize this place floods every now and then. So let's take the timbers and elevate them on a set of piers and push the house up 3 feet. Mm-hmm. So now when it floods under my house, not
right. And now I don't want raccoons living underneath there, so I'm going to close that space.
So I'm going to close that space. And it's funny because the whole time you were talking, I'm thinking about like when we're driving around Houston, you have all these elevated houses. They have brick all around the crawl space, and then they have these like iron grates that have almost nothing air moving across them.
But we did see quite a few that were sort of, when they raised the building, the spaces underneath are quite open. They called them vented crawl spaces, but they were actually just
An elevated house, pretty much.
Sort of semi-closed-in piers.
Yeah.
From a structural point of view.
Okay, so if our envelope turns and pause, that's why we got to switch batteries each time. Yep. They don't go down equally.
Does that mean we have to start over? Or?
I need to know what I was saying, so I don't forget. We'll go back to your last comment was about. Nah, I can't. I heard it too.
Trying to put it in the hole.
While we're doing this, do we need to check the others that we haven't
They
changed?
look good. We got about 15 minutes left. I think we'll be good. Because that one's 2 and this one's 2 still. And that's Peter's framing.
Yeah, show Peter the screen.
Do we need to clap again, Jay?
It probably wouldn't hurt.
3, 2, 1. Okay, so then we've talked about how we get there. We talked about the envelope turning underneath. And we really shouldn't glaze over the idea that our insulation layer is there too. I feel like that's the one that most people get wrong. But I would say the second most vented crawl space mistake is putting something in the crawl space that then is going to share air with the house, and that's sticking mechanicals down there.
Yeah, and that gets back to my original thinking is that you need to step back and find out what your end game is, right? Because if my end game is, okay, we can sit there and talk about the house, we can talk about the location of control layers all day long and the advantages. But what it comes down to, I think, is where's the mechanical system going in this house, right? Is any of that going to be thought of as part of the crawl space? Because if it is, you might as well just build a slab on grade and put the mechanical system in your garage because that's effectively what you're doing anyway, right?
And we see an awful lot of that,
And we see
too.
an awful lot of that, right? And in some cases, you're better off just putting it in the backyard probably and just running it up the back of the house.
We're going to say garage is also a no-no because there is nothing good about the air quality in the garage the same way as a vented crawl space. You have no control over it, so you can't guarantee that that space is healthy to breathe air from.
So, Steve, are you saying that fundamentally the reason we build crawl spaces is that, or the reason we should build crawl spaces is because we need it for the mechanical space? Are there other reasons you would do a crawl besides just locating?
Well, I think aesthetically, people don't want to see their house on piers, right? And the material that you have to use, and we have done numerous drawings and such because when I was working with Jerry out at Artistic Homes, we were trying to develop can we do a simple raised platform house with a wooden skirt and still have it be stucco all the way to the ground? And
because they always do slab on grade.
They always did slab on grades, but they had
trouble with mechanical.
Well, they had trouble with mechanical. Well, it wasn't even to put mechanical down there. It was just. There was a lot of people that complained about living on a slab-on-grade house. It hurts my knees. I'm older. I can feel it walking around the house all day.
Floor's
so
cold.
they wanted to have a wooden-framed floor option. So could we do it on a set of piers? And then could we put a skirt around it that integrates?
That's
and
really.
just,
I didn't know that
we're
you did
going to
that work
miss
with
their
them.
mobile homes too, so they
which
is on a crawl space.
So it is exactly a mobile home is virtually a crawl space, right? You just got the wheels down there instead of, and the lower level is where the wheels go, round and round. Anyways, I had to
Okay,
finish that.
so I'm not a fan of a vented crawl space just because I don't want a hard to access, unconditioned, uncontrolled area up against my envelope that I'm never going to have a client go down there and find something before it's a problem. Mm-hmm. So in my opinion, I would rather seal the crawl space, bring it into the envelope, make it part of the building, treat it as a lower level basement, no matter how tall it is. So that entails that red line test for the air sealing and thermal envelope.
But you made a comment earlier that, okay, so the stuff's going to run under the joist, and the whole time the back of my mind has been thinking about that. If I were to build a vented crawl space, how would I treat it? Would I really? Because you could theoretically do a wooden floor frame, do a subfloor, and we're getting into the details of the crawl space here.
Here.
Do the subfloor, and then what if, like, on top of the subfloor, we just did like a Sega Myrex or something and ran it all the way across the floor, let it flap over, put 4 or 6 inches of rigid insulation, a second subfloor, and then turn the Sega up. So now everything came down and goes across the top of the subfloor.
Yeah, so...
And out. Because that, well, I'm just saying, that takes out, because we've talked about the pier detail and what do you do at the piers. So it takes that
for
out of
air
that
sealing.
Plan. Yeah, for air sealing and continuity's sake, right? We used the flat plane, which is the most continuous plane in the house, the subfloor plane, as part of the solution.
The problem with that is now you put your floor joist in an unconditioned, poorly accessed, potentially poorly ventilated, because I don't think I've ever been in a well-ventilated crawl space environment.
But if it's a house that's 3 or 4 feet up or 5 feet up in backwoods Louisiana, I say backwoods, but anywhere in Louisiana or Houston,
I think most
whatever,
of Louisiana is backwoods. No offense,
probably.
Louisiana.
It's beautiful country, but
So
if it's 3 or 4 feet, I mean, it's basically we built a deck. I just chose to put a house on top of the deck.
I'm just saying that it does. I have no problem detailing the piers. You and I just did that at the Hilltop house.
Right.
I have no problem getting that continuity, that house final tested at 0.58 ACH 50. I think I would rather see all that be inside the envelope than have any of it out there for our purposes.
Yeah.
But I understand what you're saying. Putting it on top of the subfloor, that is our largest plane. It's the simplest too. Heck, you could use Advantech and tape the seams.
Probably.
You know.
Or something.
The only thing there is that there is a lot of holes that are going to be poked in it, and if they end up moving
there's a lot of holes
things,
there if you design a lot of holes, right? Because we've also talked about when we worked with Gothier about the SIPS house that we can send all over the world in a container and then put it together, and we were talking about having a controlled tower of utilities or whatever. But I mean, the electric utility or whatever can come in overhead. The sewer is probably the one thing that has to go down and out. Mm-hmm. Water can come in somewhere in the sidewall or something.
Ejector and shoot it out the wall, maybe,
or something. But I mean, if our biggest crises on a 2,000 square foot house was solving for a 4-inch pipe that comes through, I think we're smart enough to handle that solution. But yeah, so detailing it, I think it always comes back to, you need to think about what is that end game plan and then work backwards instead of trying to work forwards, right? Is the mechanical equipment going in there? Is the floor frame part of the conditioned space or part of the unconditioned space? Where is my thermal envelope? Where is that air barrier, and where are these things going in detailing it? Because I think it's...
So are we also saying that if we're going to use a crawl space, that it's somewhat responsive to the site and climate? Or are the issues, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter what climate you're in, and it doesn't matter which site, you still have the crawl space as an option?
Yeah. I mean, it's always an option. And then I'm going to go to one of your favorite new words, hybrid. Right? Like, why does
you were going to say apricot when you were talking about his favorite new words. For some reason, I thought you were
apricot.
Yeah, didn't you tell
apricot?
Us that one of his
like monkeys eat?
It's a fruit.
No, that's apricot, not apricot.
Well, I thought you were going to talk about pecans and pecans, but if you want to talk about apricots,
I want to talk about hybrid lower levels. So, if you were sitting there and saying things like, again, what is that end game plan? And talking about should it be vented or unvented or this or that, the first question that comes to mind is, why am I doing a crawl space, like you said? And the second one is, how big does it actually need to be? Right? Does it need to be the perimeter of the house? Can we shorten it to a smaller section so that it just... I'm doing a lot of
that nice raised ranch.
So
look
you
where the
have
house.
that nice raised ranch. But I'm doing a ranch right now in Texas, and it has a basement because she wants a root cellar. It gave us a provision to put the water heater and one of the mechanical systems in there. But it's a 3,800 square foot house, and the basement's 200, 300 feet, probably 300 square feet.
Wait a minute. I'm a little bit insulted right now that you are working with a client who has a root cellar and you didn't call your building scientist friend to talk about bare dirt in a basement. Come on, buddy.
Because we've talked about it a gazillion times.
We've talked about root cellars
Yeah, we have.
a million times.
Yeah, I've done probably half a dozen of them.
How long have you two been friends? How is it
Apparently,
possible there are any new...
Since 58,
yeah,
when
since
Peter
there's...
was...
I mean, this conversation's gone right to earth. I'm really insulted.
you're really digging a hole.
Yeah, here we go.
Goodness.
I think we're right back at the beginning of the podcast now.
It did come full circle there. Okay, so I'm going to make a stance on this, but I have a feeling because you two work in much larger areas than what I work, vented or unvented, what's your preference?
Oh, I would always do unvented, but it's a question of, again, what is my end game? Because I could very easily sit here and say, why not both? Right? Because I could do if it was a 2,000 square foot footprint, I could do a small 400 square foot crawl space in the middle that handles utilities, a place to put the water heater, a place to put the HVAC system, and then let the rest of it go on a series of piers
I know, but I think we're just going to split hairs on whether or not those piers are a crawl space.
Yeah.
That's a pier foundation. That's not a crawl space.
That's not a crawl space. So I would just
talking about if
I
you're-
would always do unvented. I mean, for me,
For control. Right?
For control.
Peter.
That's how I was taught.
Sorry. To vent a crawl space, you need a driving force for the air exchange. And one of the places where we have almost no driving force, no stack effect, very little wind at ground level. The code guidance on this is a total crock of you know what, because that ratio has nothing to do with how much air moves through that space. So if you're going to vent it, it has to actually have air move through it. So how are you going to do that? You'd have to do some type of active ventilation. And
So then you have an energy penalty for having a vented crawl space when the vented crawl space is supposed to be taking care of itself. At that point, how much is it to just dump one supply air into that basement and insulate everything?
I just don't think that there's very many situations where that's the right answer.
I agree. Are we about to end this by agreeing on something?
Oh, I totally agree with you, gentlemen, all the time.
Yeah, I'm still insulted, but
So then we agree on Top Gun.
can we do a special topic on root cellars? Because I really want to go there.
Okay, I'll
I'm
pretend
doing
to
one
write that
now.
down.
I'm doing a house now. The basement is probably 2,400 square feet, and the root cellar alone is probably 300 square feet.
I wonder why we call them basements and then root cellars.
I think it has to do with what decade you were born in.
Yeah, well, okay, so we're going to have a conversation about a whole bunch of things related to roots and cellars.
Okay, so I'm going to leave you guys with
Is it called root cellar because you usually store plant vegetables that are root type vegetables?
I would imagine.
Is that?
Yeah.
Okay, if
I
you
don't
know the answer to that without looking it up, please send Peter a direct message on Instagram.
Yeah, there you go. That'll
That'll go right to his desk in a heartbeat.
That way he gets it. Okay, so I'm going to leave you with a closing thought. We all agreed that for the most part, a non-vented crawl space is a good idea, or is a better idea. But I think we would all agree that a vented roof is a better idea.
A vented roof?
Because you got driving forces up there. Thank you.
That's what I was hoping you would say. Is
Totally
the
switched
difference
gears. You made me change levels. And I wasn't prepared for that. I'm still at the lowest level.
Yeah, well said. Steve is at the lowest level.
Are we in agreement? Here we go. We're in agreement on that one. For those of you just listening to the podcast, that was Peter and I high-fiving for the first time on the podcast.
I know funny, and that's not funny. That just wasn't funny at all. There was no humor in
I'm
that.
going to level with you,
No,
Steve.
I'm done.
Goodness.
Listen, you guys can carry on with the rest of the podcast here. I'm done.
Okay, so if you would like to join us on the UnBuild It Podcast as Steve's replacement, again, please send a message to Peter's Instagram, and he may or may not get it. Thanks for watching the podcast today if you tuned in on YouTube. Thanks for listening if you are smarter than Peter when it comes to being able to figure out where to listen to a podcast. And I really am picking at Peter, but he really doesn't know how to use his cell phone. Stay
trying
tuned.
to figure out why it doesn't flip.
Yeah, exactly. Or where's the cord that goes to the wall so he can actually talk
If
on
there
it?
isn't a dial to put your finger in, how do you guys work those things?
You call the operator and you tell her who you want to talk to. Thanks for watching the podcast. Tune in next time. If you have any suggestions for topics or questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us on Instagram. It's UnBuild It Podcast on Instagram. Click that like and subscribe button. Tell a friend. Leave us a 5-star review. Until next time, I'm Jake Bruton.
I'm Peter Yost.
I'm Steve Basic, apparently.
Have a good day.